and welcome to my channel. My name is Sarah and I love to talk about books, and today I'm going to talk about my top 10 from 2021. I know this is a little bit late, but I've been away for a bit. So I read 70 books in 2021. 16 of those were 5-star reads. In fact, all of them were above a 3-star. So I don't know if that means I'm a soft touch or whether I just had a really great reading year. But yeah, 16 of them were 5 stars. But I thought 16 is probably too many to put in a video, especially if you know me, it probably end up being over an hour long. So I've whittled it down to 10. But these 10 are not in any particular order because that's just trying, like, getting me to pick a favourite child. Don't tell the boys, but it's Hamish. And like all good the year that was recaps, I'm going to be taking a trip down memory lane and revisiting past videos when I talked about these books at the time. So in February I read 3 books which remained favourites throughout the year, and they were The Water Dancer by Ta-Nehisi, When the Music Stops by Jo Heap, and Unsettled Ground by Claire Fuller, which I have just been sent a paperback version of. It's just coming out in paperback this year. The publisher sent me this as a thank you for my review, which I'm super chuffed about. That's the second time Penguin have sent me a book to say thank you for a review. So and you know, and both the times it's been books I really loved as well, so I'm really glad of that. So enough about that. Why did I love these 3 books? And I've realised that the blend of historical fiction with magical realism is something that I really enjoy. I'm also really interested in Black history, and so when I read the premise of this book I knew I had to read it. This is the story of Hiram Walker, who is a slave on a tobacco plantation in Virginia, I think. His mother was sold off when he was quite young, and so he has lived his life between the street where the other slaves live and serving up at the big house where the slave owners live. As a young man, an accident where he nearly drowns unlocks this magical power within him, and he finds himself joining the Underground Railroad, which is the secret network of people who are working to free slaves and move them into the north where slavery is not legal. His work with the railroad takes him to the north, but the pull of his adoptive family back on the plantation is too strong for him to resist. I thought this book was spellbinding, both in terms of the writing and the plot. I felt there was like enough balance between the lyrical descriptions but also the action of the slave rescues to really kind of keep me interested, captivate me, and drive the story forward. I really like the female characters in this book. I thought they were all individually realised and they had their own experiences and story arcs, and I enjoyed the main character of Hiram as well. I felt that he was flawed enough to seem realistic. And obviously, although this is a historical fiction, the time and the situations in which it is set still play such a heavy role in society today, and this was, for me anyway, a really informative read. And it's a beautiful ode to those people who were kept as slaves. Is When the Music Stops by Jo Heap. This book, wow, this book, guys, this is such a gem of a book, and it's the story of Robert and Ella, whose lives begin on the same street in Glasgow, and which are intertwined throughout the decades through music and loss. It's also structured around the 7 modes of music. So these are the 7 ways around which music has been arranged ever since ancient times. It's not as highbrow as it sounds for those non-musically talented among us, but it gives the book a really nice structure. And it follows Ella from the present day, where she is elderly and has found herself lost in quite a traumatic situation, and looks at 7 pivotal moments of her and Robert's lives throughout the decades, and with a cast of characters who are also central to those moments in time. I felt that this book blends a similar vibe to One Day by David Nichols, with The 5 People You Meet in Heaven by Mitch Albom, but with added ghosts and music and a building sense of tension throughout the whole book to create something that's really unique. I feel like Heap's prose is quite simple, but it's still gorgeous. And there's a touch of like whimsy in this book that stops it ever being dark or bleak. And then of course there is the element of music, which is kind of a character in and of itself. And in particular, I really appreciated how the importance of music with those who are suffering from dementia is really at the core of this book. I just thought this book was really clever. It was sad, but it was warm, and I absolutely loved that element of tension that builds through the book as we were looking at Ella in the present day and the situation which she's found herself in. I just thought this book was really special. I adored it, and I would definitely be looking to read something else that Joe Heap has written. So Unsettled Ground is the story of two 51-year-old twins, Jeannie and Julius, who have always lived with their mother Dot in quite a dilapidated, rundown, not a farmhouse, like a small holding. Jeannie was diagnosed with a heart condition at quite an early age, so her whole life has really been lived within the walls of the family home. And similarly, Julius has always been very loyal as part of the family, particularly after their father's death. And so when Dot dies suddenly, the twins find themselves quite lost without their mother. And a few different situations combine to make the walls of their existence start to crumble around them. And from that rubble, their mum's secrets start to come out. And I love a family secrets story. But this is also a story about abject poverty, social isolation, and family bonds being tested. And, you know, I will say this is a bleak book, but it's also really powerful, and particularly the character of Jeannie. Life just kept throwing punch after punch at her, and my heart was with her. But I was also quite in awe of her, because even though her resources are so scant, she manages to keep pulling herself through. You know, it broke my heart because every time it looked like she'd hit rock bottom, she found out that actually there was further to fall. I just thought she was such a well-rounded character, and she's not the only one. I think Fuller's really good at creating fully realised characters, even if they're only in the story for a couple of pages. And what she's also really good at, because I noticed this in our Endless Numbers days, is that she can build and build and build the tension in a story to the point that, like, when it hit its height, I was like sitting bolt upright in my chair like, oh my god, what's gonna happen next? And I love an author that can do that to me, and I think that's where the power of this book lies, is that there's too much tension to pull you through it that you don't actually get lost in the bleakness of the story. So particularly as the story goes on, this isn't an easy read, but it is a rewarding one. And I just think Claire Fuller is a fascinating writer. She takes these almost unique situations, makes them relatable, and just creates these really interesting stories out of them that you really are invested in. I had so much hair, and I was very, very blonde. I kind of miss it. Anyway, back to the books. March also had a couple of gems for me. I read the Death of Vivek OG by Akwaeke Emezi for Scott and Elle over at Gunpowder Fiction and Plot. They had the Read Under the Bed book club, so I read that for that. And I also read the Confessions of Frannie Langton by Sara Colins. So why did I love those? But I was really keen to take part in Scott and Elle's book club because I think they are fab, and I would probably read anything they ever recommended, so I knew I could trust them with this pick. I was astonished by this book. So unsurprisingly, this is about the death of Vivek Oji, but it is also about a lot more than that. It's about his life, his family, his friends, his search to find a way to express his identity, and it's also a book about the importance of being seen. So it opens with Vivek's mother finding his body on their veranda, and then we delve into Vivek's story to find out how that happened. And I was glued to this book from the very first chapter. I am really partial to an LGBTQ plus story anyway, and in the past few years I've really enjoyed books written and by African authors and set in Africa. So this brought both of those elements together, but there was something more than that. There's something really magical about Emezi's writing, which makes me really excited to get to Freshwater. As we got to know the characters, particularly the character of Vivek, but also his cousin Osita, I was just really invested in their stories. This is a really powerful book about the constraints placed on people when they face prejudice, whether that's against their gender identity, their sexual preference, or even just their self-identity. Vivek is a really wonderful, vibrant person, and so his death is a real tragedy, not just for the reader or for Vivek himself, but also all the people around him. And I think it's the refusal of societies or organisations to accept that vibrant spectrum of human identities that's really at the root of this story. And I think voices like Emezi's are really important in calling those sorts of things out, because it's the only way to change the status quo. So this is a real page turner of a book, but it has a really important message at its core, which for me are the ingredients for the perfect book. The Confessions of Frannie Langton by Sara Colins. This I have been really looking forward to. I think the premise sounds really interesting. I mean, and the gorgeous cover. But I really liked the fact that this book shines a light on Britain's role in the slave trade. It's kind of always viewed more as a blight on America's history. And whilst we know that Britain loved to colonise, we don't really talk about that link to slavery. It's much more cleverly hidden in our history, but this book really discusses it. It opens with a court case which is causing quite a stir in 1800s London, because Frannie, a housemaid, has been accused of murdering her employer and his wife. Did she do it? Not even Frannie really knows. So instead what she does is she tells her lawyer her story, from being born on a plantation in Jamaica, being plucked from the fields to work in the big house, from her passage to London, where she finds herself in a relationship which would rock polite society, and in the process she exposes many more crimes than just the one that she is accused of. So this isn't just a whodunit, it's an indictment of race science, air quotes with that one, and the men who are so desperate to make their name and their prejudices synonymous with how an entire group of people should be viewed and treated. This is a slow burn of a book, as Frannie kind of builds up and peels away each of the layers of who she is, what's happened to her, her character, and the rights and wrongs done both to and by her. And it's told in prose that's really quite elegant, but it isn't too beautiful to delve into the ugliness of what she has experienced. There's really few likeable characters in this book. Even Frannie herself kind of pushes those boundaries of sympathy, but despite that, I did find myself rooting for her. I think this is a story that really explores the shockwaves of trauma, both on an individual level, but on a global scale as well. So this is not a light read, but it's a really good one. I really enjoyed this book, and I'm so glad it lived up to my expectations. And yes, the Scott and Nell fangirling continues to this day. In April, I tackled a big book that had been on my shelf for quite a while, and that was The Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver. Oh, it's very bashed. It was bashed when I got it secondhand. Obviously, I love this too. I was nervous going into this for a couple of reasons. One, it's huge, it's over 600 pages. And more than that, I'm really into reading about the experiences of people who have been colonized and post-colonialism. And this book talks about that, but it's written by a white American woman. I think she's American. Maybe I've just made that assumption. And the story itself is the experience of being in Congo as told by white missionary American people. So I was concerned how that would play out, but obviously, seeing as I loved it, those fears were totally unfounded. So this is the story of, like I said, an American missionary family. They go to Congo in the beginning of the 60s, and it's at the time of the Belgian withdrawal of power and, on the surface of it at least, independence coming to Congo. And they've gone there to spread the good news to a village of completely unsuspecting, is it Congolese? Or have I just made that up? Anyway, these people are not really participants in the choice of having a missionary family foisted upon them. The family is headed by Nathan. He is like a zealot. He's totally focused on his purpose to the point of being blinkered to, you know, slightly minor things like the needs and wants of the community that he has planked himself into. Language barriers, cultural barriers, or even getting to know his unwitting new congregation. And, you know, from that you can tell that his mission goes about as well as you could assume in that situation. And he kind of rules his family in much of the same way. The story is actually told through the eyes of his wife and his 4 daughters, I think there are. The wife's voice is from a time quite long after the aftermath, or like long into the aftermath of what has happened, and his daughters' voices are narrating it as it goes on, and then the years that follow their original mission. And this isn't just a story about the family, it's not just a story about the mission or the village in which they live. This book is all encompassing. It looks at Congo under Belgian rule, it looks at the struggle for independence, and it looks at what happens when 2 big countries, so America and Russia during the Cold War, use a colonized country as sort of like the pitch on which to play out their power games. And so it's kind of the intersection of the political, the cultural, and the personal, and it's told through some very, very interesting characters. Each of the women has a strong individual voice and experience and way of seeing the world. I think my particular favourite was one of the daughters, Ada. She's part of a set of twins, and she has been born with disabilities and seems to be selectively mute. But her inner monologue, her way of seeing things is really fascinating and so compelling. And then I also loved to hate the elder sister, Rachel, who is like the archetypal self-absorbed, vapid airhead. I was so amused by her. This is going to be ironic because I'm probably going to mispronounce this, her malapropisms. And although sometimes that kind of verged on a bit of a caricature, I really enjoyed that. And just seeing how she just totally doesn't understand and doesn't want to understand the context in which she's living. She is totally powered by selfishness. And yeah, she's a fun read. And all these voices combined creates this really rich book that has a lot of depth and beauty and warmth to it, even though there is so much tragedy in the story, both in terms of what happens to the family and in terms of what is happening to Congo. And so, like I said, I loved this, and my fears were completely unfounded, because although she is a white woman writing about a white family, it is their experience of living in a colonized country. But what she does do is turn a really critical eye on that colonialism and exploiting other less developed nations for wealth and power. I thought this was fabulous. Apologies for the poorly framed video there. Even now, nearly 2 years into my booktube journey, I still have not figured out lighting. or framing. But May brought a book that I'm pleased to hear has been equally loved by those who have read it after I gushed about it, and that was Before My Actual Heart Breaks by Tish Delaney. So I think what had made me interested in this book is that it is set in Ireland from I think the 70s onwards, and so the Troubles do play a large part of that. But then another thing that made me pick up the book is from the blurb, it sounded like a woman in her 40s looking back at on her life and realizing that she wasn't where she had thought she would be when she was a teenager. That her dreams and expectations haven't really come to pass, and that's another theme that I'm really interested in reading about. So we meet Mary, the main character, when she's in her teens, and she is struggling with her home life. Her mother is this really tyrannical bitch of a woman, and the only thing she seems to care about is being seen as the most pious of them all. And then outside of her home, she's navigating the segregation and the military kind of occupation for the chance to snog her boyfriend like any typical teenage girl. She dreams of flying away and escaping, but those dreams come crashing down when she finds herself 16, unmarried and pregnant, and is put under the pressure of her mother, of society, of the religious control of the day, to take a path that she had not expected. And over the next 25 years, Mary settles into that existence, but a kind of core question this book looks at is, has she missed the chance to make those dreams a reality? Has she missed her chance at finding love? This book touched me really deeply. I literally never cry at books, but I cannot count how many times I blubbed over this one. And I don't know really what that was. Did I connect with Mary on a really raw level, or was I just really brokenhearted at the thought of the dreams that she had and how she hadn't been able to reach them? Or was it the sadness that, you know, even in the life that she did end up living, things could have been very different? I really keenly felt like the passage of time and how that can't be snatched back, and also how this book delves into the damage that can be done if someone is made to feel small, and how that damage to their self-worth and their self-confidence can lead them to going inward and to put up walls to protect themselves from potential rejection. How that negativity inside can blinker a person even to the opportunities that lie right at their feet. And it was like an ache as I read, feeling all those feelings. I loved Mary, even though at times you can feel like you want to shake her, but I could see that, you know, how broken she was and how she just wasn't able to pick herself up and get on with things in the way that some other people might be. And I thought she was just really well fleshed out. In fact, most of all of the female characters really in this book are, even her horrible mother. And there's this really strong sense of place. I could feel as if I was sitting in the tiny farmhouse kitchen with them. And it really evoked so many senses in me, and I love the way that Delaney is able to get to those core human emotions, even in characters that don't say a lot. They're quite stoic and silent, like the character of John Jones, and then her father as well, who is he's a sympathetic character, but he's also incredibly unlikable in how he doesn't stick up for his children against his wife. But even in them, you can really understand what is causing the way they are. And I just thought this book was heartbreaking, but in a really beautiful way. And that's something I am absolutely a sucker for. So yeah, I really loved this book. My hair disappeared. And I also persisted with my very poor video framing. And then came the books that I read for the BookTube Prize Fiction Final, and what a treat that was. They were all books that I had these three were all books I had planned to read anyway, and none of them disappointed. So we had Shuggie Bain, by Douglas Stewart. There was also My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell, and Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. Fantastic books. God, I was looking forward to this. So, despite the fact it's called Shuggie Bain, this is really the story of Agnes Bain, who is a single mother in 1980s Glasgow, and how her mistreatment by men and her struggle with alcohol impacts her and her kids, mainly wee Shuggie of the title. Shuggie has struggles of his own with an absent father, a sexuality that really wasn't embraced in that time or in the community in which the story is set, and an absolutely heartbreaking, undying love for his mother. And, you know, this is a bleak book. From the schemes and the mining town where a lot of it is set, to the seemingly endless downward spiral of Agnes, the unhappiness of Shuggie, and the backdrop of Thatcherite decimated Glasgow and the surrounding towns. But at the same time, there's humour and glimmers of light which shine through, and it really moved me through so many different emotions. And actually, despite its kind of booker status, it's really readable. So like I said, it's a near perfect book. Kind of the proposition of a book about Shakespeare made me kind of do this. But the more people talked about it, and that it dealt with grief, and I really love me some grief in a novel because I am like a fun time party girl, I did swing back around to it. And this book isn't just about grief. There's lots of family dynamics, which again I really love, and I was totally mesmerised by the character of Agnes. This was another one I listened to on audiobook, which was it was like a meditative experience. Maybe that was just down to the narrator's voice, but I'm fairly sure it was actually because of the like near flawless prose. It's beautiful, but it's not flowery. It's unshrinking about certain things, but it's not graphic. And it's calm, but it still has like a lot of emotion. I thought this was a really powerful book, My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. This is about a woman who has to re-examine the relationship she had with her teacher when she 14 when it starts, or 15, I think she might be 14, and kind of examine it to see, you know, maybe it wasn't quite the equally powered, non-predatory and totally ungross relationship that she's always led herself to believe. And this comes after accusations from other former pupils are made against him. And this is kind of like, I guess it's Lolita told from Lolita's perspective, but with a hefty dose of Me Too realism. It's a really confronting book, and it felt very true to how something like this could play out. You know, it's ick vibes woven between some really keen observations, or maybe it's some keen observations woven between ick. I can't decide if it was heavier on the ick or the observations, but it's an unsettling blend. It will be a difficult read for a lot of people, but it worked for me. And it was also my first time judging for the BookTube Prize, and I'm doing it again this year, so that was obviously a great experience too. The other 6 5-star books I read, I do feel like they deserve a mention, so I will list them in the description box below and link to the review videos for those, just in case you want to see them. So even though I ended the year on a really bad reading slump, I still managed to have a really good reading year, which just goes to prove it's not always quantity when it comes to, it's never quantity when it comes to reading, it's all about quality. So have you read any of those? What did you think? Did you love them? Did you hate them? It doesn't matter whether our opinion differed. I'd just love to hear your thoughts, so drop me a comment below and let me know what your favourite book from 2021 was, or if you've done a kind of a top 10 whatever best books that you read last year video, then let me know. I would love to go and check it out. And so until next time, bye.